You ever sit in a room full of people who are supposed to love you and feel absolutely invisible? Like you could stand up, scream at the top of your lungs, and nobody would even turn their head? That's exactly where I was 3 days after my grandfather's funeral, sitting in his solicitor's office, surrounded by my family, feeling like a ghost at my own life. My name's Alex. I'm 28, and according to everyone in this room, I'm the family disappointment. The office was one of those old money places in central London, mahogany panels, leather chairs that probably cost more than my monthly rent, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves stuffed with legal texts nobody actually reads. Caroline Rothman, my grandfather William's solicitor, sat behind a desk that looked like it had witnessed a century of family secrets. She was elegant, probably mid-60s, with sharp eyes that missed absolutely nothing. But I wasn't looking at her. I was looking at them. My sister Victoria sat directly across from me, flanked by our parents like she was royalty holding court. She's 25, blonde, perfect in that effortless way that makes you wonder if she's even human. Ivy League graduate, works in finance at some firm where the bonuses have 7 figures. Engaged to Dominic, a hedge fund manager who wears watches worth more than I'll earn in 5 years. She's everything my parents ever wanted in a child. And then there's me. I teach English at a comprehensive school in South London. The kind of place where half the kids don't have books at home, where I spend my own money on supplies because the budget's been slashed to ribbons. I drive a Honda that's older than some of my students. I live in a flat share in Lewisham because that's all I can afford. I chose this life. I chose teaching over investment banking, chose purpose over profit, chose making a difference over making my parents proud. And they've never forgiven me for it. My father, Marcus, had his arm draped around Victoria's shoulders, whispering something that made her smile. He's tall, broad-shouldered, with silver hair that makes him look distinguished rather than old. He spent my entire life perfecting the art of looking at me like I'm something unpleasant he stepped in. Right now, he wasn't looking at me at all. My mum, Patricia, sat beside him with that tight smile she's worn for as long as I can remember. The smile that says, "I'm disappointed in you, but too well-bred to say it outright." She was dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, playing the grieving daughter-in-law beautifully. But I'd seen her checking her phone during the funeral service. I knew exactly how deep that grief ran. The extended family filled out the rest of the room. Uncle Paul, Aunt Linda, a handful of cousins whose names I barely remembered because they'd stopped inviting me to family gatherings years ago. They were all buzzing with that particular energy people get at Will readings. Anticipation. Greed dressed up as grief. "Alex, darling, how's the teaching going?" Aunt Linda asked, her voice dripping with the kind of false sweetness that makes your teeth hurt. "Still at that school in South London." She said South London, the way other people might say sewage treatment plant. "Yeah," I said quietly. "Still there." "How lovely," she replied, and I could see the pity in her eyes. "I'm sure it's very fulfilling." Fulfilling. That was their code word for "you're wasting your life." Victoria leaned over and whispered something to Dominic, who smirked. I caught the word idealistic and wanted to disappear through the floor. But here's what none of them knew. Here's the secret I'd been carrying for months, the one thing that made this whole nightmare bearable. Grandpa William had been different. While everyone else wrote me off, while my parents compared me endlessly to Victoria, while the family treated me like I'd contracted some contagious form of failure, Grandpa William saw me. Really saw me. Every Sunday for the past 5 years, we'd meet at this little cafe in Bloomsbury. We'd talk for hours about books, philosophy, social justice, all the things that made Marcus roll his eyes and change the subject. William never judged my choices. He celebrated them. He told me I had integrity, character, courage. He said those things mattered more than money ever could. And in those final weeks at the hospital, when the cancer was eating him alive and everyone else was too busy planning the funeral to actually visit, I was there, holding his hand, reading to him, listening to him talk about his life, his regrets, his hopes for me. That's when he started saying it. Every single visit, like a mantra he needed me to remember. "Your father's about to learn what real character looks like, Alex. Just wait, son. Just wait." I didn't understand what he meant then, but I was about to. Caroline cleared her throat, and the room fell silent. She opened a leather folder, adjusted her reading glasses, and began. "Thank you all for coming," she said, her voice carrying that particular authority that comes from 3 decades of telling wealthy people what to do with their money. "We're here for the reading of William Rothwell's last will and testament. Before we begin, I want to make something clear. This process will be conducted according to William's explicit wishes, and I will not be taking questions or entertaining disputes until after the reading is complete. Is that understood?" Marcus nodded impatiently. Victoria wiped her eyes. Patricia clutched her tissue. And I sat there, feeling my grandfather's absence like a physical weight on my chest, wondering what he'd meant by those final words. The answer was about to destroy everything my family thought they knew. Caroline's voice filled the room like a judge delivering a verdict. She started with the small stuff: charitable donations to various organizations, a generous pension for Mrs. Chun, Grandpa William's housekeeper who'd been with him for 20 years. Various cousins received amounts in the tens of thousands. Everyone nodded along, appropriately solemn, waiting for the real money to be mentioned. Then Caroline's tone shifted slightly, and I felt the energy in the room change. "William Rothwell held extensive property holdings and investment portfolios," she read. "His primary residence in Mayfair, his countryside estate in the Cotswolds, and his various commercial properties throughout London represent significant assets. Additionally, his shareholdings in Rothwell Industries and various other investments constitute the bulk of his financial estate." Marcus leaned forward. This was what he'd been waiting for. "To my son, Marcus Rothwell," Caroline continued, "I leave my shares in Rothwell Industries, currently valued at approximately £8.2 million, with the condition that these shares cannot be sold or transferred for a minimum period of 10 years from the date of my death." 8 million. The number hung in the air. Marcus nodded, satisfied but clearly expecting more. I could see it in his face. He thought this was just the beginning. Then Caroline said Victoria's name, and everything accelerated. "To my granddaughter, Victoria Elizabeth Rothwell, I leave the sum of £11 million to be transferred immediately upon the execution of this will, with no conditions, restrictions, or limitations attached." 11 million. The room exploded. Victoria gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, tears instantly streaming down her face. Patricia made this strangled sound, half sob, half shriek, and threw her arms around her daughter. Marcus was beaming like he'd personally earned every penny, already standing to shake Victoria's hand like she'd just won an Olympic gold medal. The relatives swarmed. Congratulations, celebrations, hugs and handshakes, and people pulling out their phones to presumably share the news. Uncle Paul was clapping Marcus on the back. Aunt Linda was crying happy tears. Dominic was kissing Victoria, probably already calculating what kind of house they could buy. And I sat there, watching it all unfold like I was behind glass. Nobody looked at me. Nobody acknowledged me. I was furniture in the corner of a room where a lottery had just been won. My stomach felt like it was full of concrete, not because I'd expected anything, I genuinely hadn't, but because I knew what was coming next. I knew what the contrast would look like. I knew exactly how this was going to feel. Caroline waited for the noise to die down. It took a full minute. Then she said my name. "To my grandson, Alexander James Rothwell." The room went completely silent. Everyone turned to look at me. I could feel their eyes like physical pressure, judgment, pity, that particular kind of satisfaction people get when they're about to watch someone else's humiliation. I wanted to disappear. I wanted to run. I wanted to never have been born. I leave my personal book collection, currently housed at the Mayfair residence, and the sum of £5,000 to assist with any immediate needs. £5,000. 5 grand versus 11 million. The math was so brutal it felt like violence. The silence lasted maybe 3 seconds. Then Marcus laughed. It wasn't a chuckle or a snort. It was a full, sharp bark of laughter, loud enough that everyone heard it, deliberate enough that everyone knew it was meant for me. "Well," he said, his voice carrying across the room with absolute clarity, "I suppose that's what you get, son. Maybe it's time you learned to earn your own way instead of expecting handouts. Your grandfather clearly agreed with me on that front. The cruelty was casual, delivered with a smile, like he was offering helpful life advice rather than publicly humiliating his own child." Patricia jumped in immediately, her voice sugary with false sympathy. "Perhaps this will motivate you to finally take life seriously, darling. You're not getting any younger and teaching." She trailed off, shaking her head like my career choice was a terminal illness. Victoria was staring down at her hands, her face flushed with either embarrassment or pleasure, I couldn't tell which. Dominic was definitely smirking. Aunt Linda leaned over to whisper something to Uncle Paul, but it was one of those whispers designed to be overheard. "Always knew William was disappointed in him. This confirms it, doesn't it?" I felt my face burning. My throat was tight. Every cell in my body was screaming at me to get up and leave, to run from this room and never look back, to put an ocean between myself and these people who shared my blood but had never, not once, treated me like I mattered. My hands were shaking. I pressed them flat against my thighs, trying to steady myself, trying to hold it together long enough to get out of here with some shred of dignity intact. £5,000 and a book collection. That's what 20 years of being William Rothwell's grandson was worth. That's what I was worth. I was halfway out of my chair, ready to leave this nightmare behind forever, when Caroline's voice cut through the noise like a blade through silk. "Mr. Rothwell," she said, and there was steel in her tone that made even Marcus pause mid-celebration. "Please sit down. We're not finished." Time seemed to slow down. Caroline wasn't looking at her papers anymore. She was looking directly at Marcus, and there was something in her expression, something hard and knowing, that made the air in the room feel suddenly thin. "We're not finished," she repeated, and this time it wasn't a suggestion. I sank back into my chair, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my temples. Victoria's smile faltered. Patricia's hand froze halfway to her tissue. Marcus's expression shifted from triumph to confusion to something that looked almost like concern. Caroline reached down beside her desk, not into the leather folder she'd been reading from, but into a separate briefcase that had been sitting by her feet the entire time. It was old, expensive-looking, with brass corners and William's initials embossed on the front. She pulled out a manila envelope, thick, sealed with red wax, and written across the front in my grandfather's distinctive handwriting, the same handwriting I'd seen on birthday cards and letters for my entire life, were the words, "Alexander James Rothwell, Confidential." My name, in his hand, like he'd known I'd need to see it, to know this was real. "This," Caroline said, holding the envelope up so everyone could see it, "is a separate testamentary document. It was executed by William Rothwell 6 weeks before his death and witnessed by myself and 2 independent solicitors in accordance with UK law. It pertains exclusively to Alexander and is to be discussed in a private meeting following this reading." The energy in the room didn't just shift. It imploded. Victoria's celebration face froze like someone had pressed pause. Marcus went from sitting back smugly to sitting forward, so fast his chair scraped against the hardwood floor. Patricia's mouth actually fell open. "What do you mean, separate document?" Marcus demanded, his voice climbing in pitch. "Everything should be disclosed here to the family. We have a right to know what's in that envelope. We're his family. We have a right. You have a right to nothing regarding Alexander's private inheritance, Mr. Rothwell." Caroline's voice was arctic, professional, but underneath it was something else, something that almost sounded like satisfaction. "William was exceptionally clear on this point," she continued. "The document is sealed, legally binding, and executed according to his explicit instructions. Its contents are Alexander's alone to share or not share as he sees fit. No one in this room, including his immediate family, has any legal right to that information unless Alexander chooses to disclose it." The words hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. Patricia made a sound somewhere between a gasp and a shriek. "This is absurd. William would never, he wouldn't do something like this without telling us. Caroline, you've known this family for 30 years. This is wrong." But Caroline didn't flinch. She looked at Patricia with the kind of calm that comes from having weathered far worse storms. "Mrs. Rothwell," she said quietly, "I was your father-in-law's solicitor and his friend for 3 decades. I assure you, he knew exactly what he was doing. He was of completely sound mind. The documentation is impeccable, and his instructions regarding Alexander were among the most carefully considered decisions I've ever witnessed him make." Uncle Paul tried next, his voice taking on that reasonable, let's all be sensible tone that men like him use when they're used to getting their way. Caroline, surely you can understand how unusual this seems. We're not trying to interfere, but a separate, private document? That's not how these things are typically done. There must be some way. There isn't. 2 words. Final. Absolute. Caroline turned to me, and for the first time since this nightmare started, someone in this room was looking at me like I was actually a person. Alexander, she said, her voice softening just slightly, we have a private meeting scheduled for tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. at my offices. Please come alone. This meeting is mandatory for the execution of your inheritance. Do you understand? I nodded. I didn't trust my voice not to crack. She slid the envelope across the polished surface of William's desk, the desk he'd sat behind for 40 years, making decisions, building his empire, apparently planning this exact moment. My fingers touched the paper. It was heavy, expensive. The wax seal bore William's family crest. My family crest. The one Marcus wore on a signet ring, and I'd never been offered. The room erupted into chaos. Marcus was on his feet, demanding explanations. Patricia was in full panic mode, her voice going shrill as she insisted this had to be a mistake, a misunderstanding, something Caroline could fix if she just listened to reason. Victoria looked genuinely confused, staring at me like she'd never actually seen me before. Dominic was whispering urgently in her ear. Aunt Linda and Uncle Paul were having a heated conversation in the corner, and I sat there, holding an envelope that weighed almost nothing but felt like it carried the entire weight of my grandfather's love. Caroline stood. This reading is concluded. Alexander, I'll see you tomorrow morning. The rest of you, please collect your copies of the official will from my assistant on your way out. I stood on shaking legs, clutching the envelope to my chest like a lifeline. And I walked out of that office while my entire family watched, finally seeing me. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my cramped bedroom in Lewisham, staring at the envelope, turning it over in my hands, tracing my grandfather's handwriting with my fingertips. Part of me wanted to rip it open immediately. Part of me was terrified of what was inside. What could possibly require this level of secrecy? What had William been planning? By the time I arrived at Caroline's offices the next morning, I'd convinced myself it was probably nothing dramatic. Maybe some personal letters, perhaps a small additional amount of money he didn't want Marcus to know about. Something sentimental. I had no idea I was about to have my entire understanding of my family ripped apart. Caroline's private office was different from the conference room where the will reading had happened. Smaller. More intimate. The walls were covered in photographs. William at various ages, shaking hands with politicians and business leaders, receiving awards, cutting ribbons. A whole life documented in frames. Tea, Caroline offered, gesturing to a chair across from her desk. Please, I managed. She poured from a proper teapot, none of that coffee machine nonsense, and slid a delicate china cup across to me. Then she sat, folded her hands on the desk, and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Before we begin, she said slowly, I need you to understand something, Alex. Your grandfather loved you deeply. What I'm about to tell you is going to fundamentally change your understanding of your family. Once you know these things, you can't unknow them. Are you ready? My mouth was dry. Yes. She opened the envelope with the kind of ceremonial care someone might use handling a historical document. Paper spilled out. Legal documents, bank statements, photographs, USB drives. She spread them across the desk in some order that made sense to her. William Rothwell's estate, as disclosed yesterday, was valued at approximately £15 million, she began. Your father received shares worth $8.2 million. Your sister received $11 million in liquid assets. Various properties and smaller bequests made up the remainder. I nodded. I knew all this. I'd lived through the humiliation. That estate, Caroline continued, her eyes meeting mine, represented approximately 15% of your grandfather's actual net worth. The words didn't land at first. They bounced off my brain like I was hearing a foreign language. I'm sorry, what? Your grandfather was extraordinarily wealthy, Alex. His total assets, including properties, investments, business interests, and liquid capital, were valued at approximately £87 million at the time of his death. $87 million. The number was so large it felt fictional. The remaining 85%, Caroline said quietly, approximately £74 million, has been left to you in an irrevocable trust. I am the primary trustee, but you are the sole beneficiary. It's yours, Alex. All of it. The room tilted. I gripped the arms of my chair, trying to process what she was saying. £74 million. That wasn't inheritance. That was generational wealth. That was never work again money. That was change the world money. Why? I whispered. Why did he humiliate me yesterday if? Because he wanted them to reveal themselves, Caroline interrupted gently. He wanted you to see, clearly and without any doubt, exactly who they are when they think you have nothing and they have everything. But there's more, Alex. And this is the part that's going to hurt. She slid a document across the desk. It was a private investigator's report, thick as a phone book, with my father's name on the front. 2 years ago, William began to suspect irregularities in the company finances, Caroline explained. He hired investigators. What they found? She paused, choosing her words carefully. Your father has been embezzling from William's companies for 15 years. Approximately £3.2 million, stolen through falsified invoices, ghost employees, manipulated property transactions. William documented everything. Bank transfers, forged signatures, emails that show clear premeditation and intent to defraud. The air left my lungs. My father, stealing from his own father. For 15 years. William wanted to prosecute, Caroline continued. He was preparing to file charges when he received his cancer diagnosis. At that point, his priorities shifted. He decided to handle it differently. Victoria's $11 million, I said suddenly, the pieces clicking together. That wasn't favoritism. No, Caroline confirmed. That was restitution. William knew Victoria had no knowledge of your father's crimes. He wanted to ensure she was taken care of regardless of what happened to Marcus. But the public humiliation of you, giving you just £5,000 in the main will, that was strategic theater. She pulled out a photograph. It showed my father and another man I didn't recognize standing outside an office building, shaking hands. The timestamp on the photo was dated 3 years ago. William had private investigators on your father for 2 years, Caroline said. He has security footage, recorded phone calls, all legally obtained, witness statements from employees who noticed the discrepancies but were too afraid to report them. He built a case that the Crown Prosecution Service has already reviewed. Your father would face 8 to 12 years in prison, Alex. Minimum. I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, couldn't process any of this. But William left the decision to you, Caroline said softly. He left you the evidence. He left you the power. He left you the choice of what to do with it. Prosecute or let it go. It's entirely up to you. She slid one more thing across the desk. A small digital recording device. Your grandfather made this for you 3 weeks before he died, she said. I think you should watch it. She pressed play, and my grandfather's face filled the screen, gaunt from illness but with eyes that were sharp, clear, and full of love. Alex, my boy, he said, his voice weak but steady. If you're watching this, then you've just sat through one of the most humiliating experiences of your life. I'm sorry I couldn't spare you that pain. But you needed to see them, son. You needed to see exactly who they are. William's face on that screen looked smaller than I remembered. The cancer had hollowed him out, carved away at the strong features I'd known my whole life. But his eyes, God, his eyes were still sharp, still seeing everything, still looking at me with the kind of love I'd only ever gotten from him. If you're watching this, he continued, his voice barely above a whisper but steady with purpose, then you've learned that your father is a thief and your mother is complicit through willful ignorance. I'm sorry I couldn't spare you that pain, but you needed to see it. They needed to reveal themselves. He shifted in the hospital bed, and I could hear the rustle of sheets, the beep of monitors in the background. I've watched Marcus treat you like a disappointment your entire life, Alex. I've watched him favor Victoria, not because she's more talented or more deserving, but because she's more compliant. Because she fits his vision of success. Because she never challenged him, never questioned him, never chose a different path. William's hand came into frame, thin and trembling. He was holding something, a photo. He turned it toward the camera. It was me at maybe 7 years old, gap-toothed and grinning, holding up a drawing I'd made. "You were always different," he said, and there was such warmth in his voice it made my chest ache. "Even as a child, you asked questions other people were afraid to ask. You cared about things that didn't profit you. You chose kindness over winning. And I watched your parents systematically try to beat that out of you. Not with fists. Marcus is too sophisticated for that, but with disappointment, with comparison, with the constant message that who you are isn't good enough." He set the photo down, and his eyes found the camera again. Found me. When I discovered Marcus was stealing from me, everything became clear. He wasn't just a bad father, he was fundamentally corrupted. He'd been teaching his children that success means ruthlessness, that money equals value, that integrity is for people who can't afford to do otherwise. And he was doing it while robbing his own father blind. William coughed, and someone off camera, probably a nurse, handed him water. He drank, then continued. "I could have prosecuted immediately. I wanted to. But then I thought about you, Alex. I thought about what would serve you best. And I realized that prosecuting your father would make you a victim of his crime. It would define you by his betrayal. I didn't want that for you." He leaned closer to the camera, and I could see the effort it took. "So I'm giving you something different, son. I'm giving you a choice. The evidence of your father's crimes is in that envelope Caroline showed you. Every bank transfer, every forged signature, every email that proves he knew exactly what he was doing. She has everything ready. The Crown Prosecution Service has been briefed. If you decide to prosecute, your father will likely face 8 to 12 years in prison." The weight of that settled over me like a physical thing. "Or," William continued, "you can choose to let it go. You can take the moral high ground. You can walk away. That's entirely up to you, and I will support whatever decision you make, even from beyond the grave." He smiled slightly at his own dark humor. "But here's what I need you to understand, Alex. This money I'm leaving you, £74 million, isn't just inheritance. It's a test and a tool. I want to see what kind of man you are when you have power, when you're no longer the underdog, when you're no longer the one they can dismiss and diminish." William's eyes were wet now, and so were mine. "Will you use this power for revenge? For justice? For change? Will you become like them? Cold, calculating, cruel? Or will you stay who you are, the boy who chose teaching over wealth, who chose purpose over prestige, who chose to be kind in a family that mistook kindness for weakness?" He paused, gathering his strength. "Your father told you to earn your own way. Well, son, you've inherited mine. Now show him what real earning looks like. Show him what character actually means. Show him that integrity isn't weakness. It's the only thing that matters when everything else burns away." William reached toward the camera like he was trying to touch me through the screen. "Make me proud, Alex. But more importantly, make yourself proud. Be the man I always knew you could be. Be the man your father will never understand." His hand dropped. His eyes were starting to close. "I love you, son. I always have. I always will. And I'm sorry I couldn't protect you better while I was alive. But I'm protecting you now. This is my final gift, not the money but the choice. Use it wisely." The screen went black. I sat there in Caroline's office, tears streaming down my face, holding my grandfather's love like a weight that was simultaneously crushing and lifting me. "Take your time," Caroline said quietly. "There's no rush on any of this." But there was, because my phone was already buzzing in my pocket, and I knew exactly who was calling. The first call came 3 hours after I left Caroline's office. "Marcus." I stared at my phone screen, watching his name flash, and something cold and analytical settled over me. This was the first time my father had called me directly in probably 2 years. The first time he'd initiated contact since I'd chosen teaching over the corporate path he'd laid out for me. And now, suddenly, he cared. I let it ring through to voicemail. 30 seconds later, a text. "Son, we need to talk. About yesterday. Call me back." Then another. "Your mother is worried about you." Then another. "Don't be childish. Answer your phone." I turned it off and went for a walk along the Thames, trying to process everything. Trying to figure out who I was now that I wasn't the family disappointment. Now that I had power. The second call came that evening. Patricia this time, her voice on the voicemail dripping with false concern. "Darling, I know yesterday was difficult. Your father may have been harsh. Grief makes us all say things we don't mean. Please come for dinner tomorrow. I'm making your favorite. We're family, Alex. Let's not let money come between us. Money come between us. As if money wasn't the only thing they'd ever valued. As if I'd been the one who'd let it divide us. I went to dinner. Not because I wanted reconciliation, but because I needed to see them. Needed to watch them perform. Needed to understand exactly what Grandpa William had been trying to show me. The house in Hampstead was exactly as I remembered. Massive, immaculate, decorated by someone who'd been paid obscene amounts to make it look like nobody actually lived there. Patricia answered the door with a hug that felt like being embraced by a mannequin. Alex, sweetheart, come in, come in. You look thin. Are you eating properly? She'd never asked that before. Not once in 28 years. Dinner was an exercise in manipulation, so transparent it would have been funny if it wasn't so pathetic. Patricia had made lamb roast, my favorite, she kept reminding me, even though my actual favorite was her cottage pie and she knew it. Victoria was there, playing at being sisterly, asking about my students with what was clearly coached interest. Even Dominic was making an effort to be friendly, though he kept checking his watch like he had somewhere better to be. And Marcus. God, Marcus was laying it on thick. Son, about what I said at the reading, he began over wine that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. I was harsh. Grief makes us say things we don't mean. Your grandfather's death hit me hard. He was my father, after all. I wasn't thinking clearly. I nodded. Didn't say anything. Just watched him work. The thing is, he continued, swirling his wine, that sealed envelope, the private meeting Caroline mentioned. That's unusual, isn't it? Did she explain what that was about? There it was. The real reason for this dinner. The only reason they'd wanted me here. Just some personal letters, I said, keeping my voice flat. Grandpa rambling about life lessons and memories. Nothing important. Some advice about teaching. That sort of thing. I watched Marcus's shoulders drop slightly. Watched the tension ease out of his jaw. Well, he said, forcing a smile. That sounds like Dad. Always sentimental with you. Probably wanted to give you some final wisdom, or whatever. Probably, I agreed. But I could see it in his eyes. He didn't quite believe me. There was still that edge of suspicion, that need to know for certain. These people didn't trust anyone, not even their own blood. Over the next 2 days, I watched them spiral. Caroline had told me she was monitoring the situation per William's instructions, private investigators keeping tabs on the family's movements, their communications, their searches. It wasn't illegal. She was protecting the estate from potential challenges. But it meant I got to see exactly what they were doing when they thought I couldn't see. Marcus called 3 different solicitors, asking about contesting wills, about private codicils, about whether he could legally compel disclosure of sealed testamentary documents. Patricia spent hours on her laptop searching things like, can you challenge a private inheritance, and how to contest a will UK. Victoria seemed genuinely uncomfortable with all of it, but not uncomfortable enough to speak up or question anything. The moment that crystallized, everything happened on the second night. I'd gone back to their house for another family dinner. They were pushing hard now, trying to keep me close, trying to figure out what I knew. I excused myself to use the bathroom and accidentally left my phone on the kitchen table, recording app active and hidden. Caroline's investigator had taught me the trick. When I came back, they were huddled around the table, voices low. I stayed in the hallway, listening through the crack in the door. That envelope bothers me, Marcus was saying. Dad was always too sentimental with that boy. Too soft. If there's more money hidden somewhere, we need to know about it. But Caroline said it was just personal. Patricia started. Caroline is lying, or Alex is lying, or both of them are lying, Marcus interrupted. Dad wouldn't have made such a production of a sealed document if it was just letters. There's something else. There has to be. So what do we do? Victoria asked quietly. We keep applying pressure, Marcus said, and his voice had that cold calculation I'd heard my entire life. Alex is weak. He's always been weak. He'll crack if we push hard enough. We just need to play the family card harder. Make him feel guilty for doubting us. Make him feel obligated. He's desperate for our approval. He always has been. We use that. Desperate for their approval. Listening to that, standing in my childhood home, Hearing my father dissect my psychology like I was a problem to be solved rather than a person to be loved, something inside me finally, irreversibly broke. Or maybe it didn't break. Maybe it finally healed. I walked back into the kitchen with a smile on my face, played out the rest of the evening, and went home. And I made my decision. 2 weeks after the will reading, I sent a message to my family through Caroline's office, private meeting regarding grandfather's estate. Tomorrow, 2 p.m., Caroline's office. Attendance mandatory. I knew they'd come. Curiosity alone would guarantee it. When I arrived at Caroline's office the next afternoon, she had everything prepared exactly as I'd requested. The conference room, the same one where the will reading had happened, was set up like a courtroom. Caroline sat behind her desk with another solicitor beside her, a man named David Shen who specialized in criminal fraud cases. A recording device sat in plain view on the table, its red light already blinking. And spread across the desk in neat folders were copies of everything. Every piece of evidence William had collected, every bank transfer, every forged signature, every email. 2 years of documented theft, organized chronologically, labeled, indexed, ready to be handed over to the Crown Prosecution Service. Marcus arrived first, his face already set in that expression of controlled anger he wore when he thought someone was wasting his time. Patricia came next, her eyes darting nervously around the room. Then Victoria, with Dominic trailing behind her like a confused accessory. They all stopped when they saw the recording device. "What's this about, Alex?" Marcus demanded, not bothering with pleasantries. "Caroline said this was urgent. If you've dragged us here for some kind of—" "Sit down, Dad." My voice cut through his bluster like a knife. It wasn't loud. It wasn't aggressive. But it carried an authority I'd never used before, and something in my tone made him pause. They sat. I remained standing. "Thanks for coming," I said, walking slowly around the table, letting the silence build. "I wanted to discuss Grandpa's estate with you all. Specifically, the part you don't know about." The energy in the room shifted instantly. Marcus sat forward, so fast his chair creaked. Patricia's hand flew to her throat. Even Dominic looked interested. "I knew it," Marcus breathed. "I knew there was more. That sealed document." "Yes, Dad. There was more. Quite a bit more, actually." I stopped walking and looked directly at him. Grandpa William's estate, as disclosed at the reading, was worth about £15 million. You got $8 million in shares. Victoria got $11 million in cash. That represented roughly 15% of his actual net worth. I let that sink in for a moment. The remaining 85%, approximately £74 million in cash, investments, properties, and business interests, was left to me in a private irrevocable trust. The £5,000 and the book collection? That was just for show. The explosion was immediate and catastrophic. Patricia actually gasped, her face going white as if I'd slapped her. Marcus slammed his hand on the table, so hard the recording device jumped. "That's impossible. He wouldn't. This is fraud. Caroline, this is fraud." But Caroline didn't even blink. She just looked at Marcus with that same cool professionalism she'd maintained throughout this entire nightmare. "It's entirely legal, Mr. Rothwell," she said calmly. "Ironclad, in fact." William was of completely sound mind. The documentation is impeccable. The trust was executed according to his explicit wishes, witnessed by multiple independent parties, and filed properly with all relevant authorities. Victoria was staring at me like I'd grown a second head. 74 million? But why would Grandpa? I don't understand. Why would he give you everything and make it look like? Because Dad's been stealing from him. Vic? The words landed like a bomb in the center of the table. For 15 years, Dad used his position as Grandpa's business partner to embezzle approximately £3.2 million through falsified invoices, ghost employees, and manipulated property transactions. Grandpa knew everything. He documented everything. And he left me the choice of what to do about it. Marcus went from rage to fear so fast I could see the exact moment it happened. The color drained from his face. His mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. "You're lying," he finally managed. "You can't prove." I slid the first folder across the table. It landed in front of him with a heavy thud. "Bank transfers," I said, showing payments from Rothwell Industries to a company called Meridian Consulting that doesn't actually exist. Except the bank account for Meridian Consulting routes directly to an account in your name. That's Exhibit A. I slid another folder. Forged signatures on property transaction documents. Grandpa had a forensic handwriting expert analyze them. Your signature, Dad. Pretending to be his. That's Exhibit B. Another folder. Emails between you and a man named Peter Sullivan discussing how to hide the money trail. Sullivan's already given a statement to the police in exchange for immunity. That's Exhibit C. I kept sliding folders, evidence stacking up like a physical manifestation of 15 years of betrayal. Security footage from the office showing you accessing confidential files after hours. Witness statements from 3 different employees who noticed irregularities but were too afraid to report them because you controlled their jobs. Phone records. More emails. Text messages. The pile was growing, damning, impossible to deny. Grandpa had private investigators on you for 2 years, Dad. He built a case that the Crown Prosecution Service has already reviewed. They're ready to file charges whenever Caroline gives them the word. You're looking at 8 to 12 years in prison. Minimum. For fraud, forgery, and theft from a family member. Marcus's face had gone from white to gray. His hands were shaking. Patricia was crying, real tears this time, not performative grief. Why? Victoria whispered. Dad, why would you? But Marcus wasn't looking at her. He was looking at me, and in his eyes I saw something I'd never seen before, genuine fear. Not of prison, not of consequences, but of me, of the fact that I had power now and he didn't. Alex, he said, his voice cracking, son, please. Let me explain. I don't want your explanations, I interrupted. I want your compliance. Here's what's going to happen. The room was suffocating. You could feel the weight of it. Decades of lies collapsing under the pressure of documented truth. I walked behind Marcus's chair, watching him shrink into himself. This man who'd spent my entire life making me feel small was finally experiencing what that felt like. Here's what's going to happen, I said, my voice steady and cold. You're going to resign from every board position you hold in Grandpa's companies, effective immediately. You're going to repay £3.2 million to the estate within 6 months. I don't care how. Sell your shares, liquidate assets, mortgage this house. That's your problem, not mine. If you do this quietly and completely, I won't prosecute. The evidence stays sealed. Marcus's hands were flat on the table, trembling. And if I refuse? I leaned down so I was level with his ear. Then Caroline files with the Crown Prosecution Service tomorrow morning, and you can explain to a jury why you stole from your dying father while publicly calling your son a disappointment for becoming a teacher. He flinched like I'd hit him. But that's not all, I continued, straightening up and walking to the other side of the table. The second condition is non-negotiable and permanent. You, Mum, and Victoria are no longer part of my life. Patricia made us sound like she'd been wounded. Alex, no. We're family. No, Mum. Family doesn't work like this. I looked at each of them in turn. These people who shared my blood but had never, not once, made me feel like I belonged. Family doesn't humiliate each other publicly for entertainment. Family doesn't steal and lie and manipulate. Family doesn't spend decades telling someone they're not good enough while simultaneously bleeding that person's grandfather dry. You taught me that blood is thicker than water, but you forgot the full quote. I paused, letting them lean in. The blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb. The bonds we choose matter more than the ones we're born into. And I'm choosing to walk away from you. Patricia was sobbing now. Please, Alex. I know we weren't perfect, but you called me a disappointment, Mum, for choosing to teach kids who actually need help instead of chasing money I didn't want. You compared me to Victoria for my entire life, making sure I knew I wasn't good enough, wasn't successful enough, wasn't worthy enough. And when Grandpa tried to show you what I was really worth, you laughed. I turned to Marcus. You laughed, Dad. When Caroline read out that I got £5,000, you actually laughed. Out loud. In front of the entire family. You thought it was funny. You thought I deserved it. His face was crumbling. I was angry. I was hurt. I didn't know. You didn't know I had £74 million, so you felt safe being cruel. That's not an excuse. That's proof of exactly who you are. I looked at Victoria, who'd been silent through all of this, tears streaming down her face. Vic, I don't hate you, I said more gently. You never asked to be the favorite, but you never questioned it either. You never stood up for me. Not once in 28 years did you tell them to stop comparing us, stop diminishing me, stop treating me like I was defective for wanting something different than what they wanted for me. I'm sorry, she whispered. I didn't know they were. I didn't realize. I know you didn't. But that's the problem. You didn't realize because you were comfortable. Because their cruelty to me never touched you. And that's not entirely your fault, but it's also not something I can forgive right now. Maybe someday. But not today. I walked back to Caroline's desk and picked up one final folder. There's one more thing, I said. Grandpa gave me £74 million. I'm establishing the William Rothwell Foundation with $30 million of that inheritance. It'll be focused on education access, supporting teachers in underfunded schools, and providing scholarships for kids who want to pursue careers in public service instead of finance. I looked directly at Marcus. Grandpa gave me power, Dad, and I'm using it the way he hoped I would, not for revenge, but for purpose. Not to hurt you, but to help people who actually need it. People like my students. Kids who are told every day that they're not good enough because they don't have money or connections or privilege. I set the folder down and moved toward the door. The $30 million is just the beginning. I'm leaving my teaching job. I can do more good with this money than I can in a classroom. But I'm not leaving teaching. I'm scaling it, building it into something that actually changes lives instead of just my small corner of South London. My hand was on the door handle when Marcus finally spoke. You're really going to do this? His voice was broken, hollow. You're really going to walk away from your family? I turned back one last time. No, Dad. You walked away from me 28 years ago when you decided I wasn't worth your respect unless I became what you wanted. I'm just finally accepting reality. I looked at Caroline, file the paperwork for the foundation, set up the trust structure, and send the resignation documents to my father by end of business today. He has 6 months to repay the estate, or we prosecute. Then I walked out of that office, out of that building, out of their lives. The autumn air hit my face, cold and clean and free. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. He would be so proud of you. Caroline. I stood on the pavement outside her office, watching people rush past on their lunch breaks, living their ordinary lives, unaware that mine had just completely transformed. £74 million. The William Rothwell Foundation. A future I could barely imagine. But more than any of that, more than the money, more than the vindication, more than the justice, I finally had something I'd been searching for my entire life. I had my grandfather's approval, and I had my own. For the first time in 28 years, I felt like enough.